Welcome to the newest edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. John Schmeelk with you, today's guest, the director of scouting for the Draft Network. That's Kyle Krabs. But first, want to remind everybody, you can find the Giants Huddle podcast on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank, on the Giants mobile app at giants.com/podcast and your favorite podcast platforms. And now we're joined by our guest. He is Kyle Krabs, the director of scouting for the Draft Network. Kyle, it's good to have you on, man. Hope this draft season and, frankly, this really weird year has treated you and your family well.
Yeah, it's good to catch up with you, John, and talk a little bit about the draft. And I don't know if it's because there was no combine this year or what, but it felt like the last 6 weeks have just completely disappeared into thin air. So it's hard to believe we're right here on the doorstep of the draft this year. And this process is always a bit of a grind, but it's been a fun class to kind of dig into, and looking forward to talking about some of these guys with you here.
Yeah, we were recording this on Thursday, so we're exactly 3 weeks out from the draft. So teams right now, with the pro days over, are starting to get together and kind of put their final draft boards together, Kyle. And I guess, why don't we start here? Anything from the pro days really change your impression of players, or is the fact that these are pro days and not combine numbers giving you and your team some pause in how you judge this athletic testing compared to how you would normally do it?
It's nice to have the guys that manage to check the box, but I don't think there's any question we're seeing more 4.3 somethings in 40 times than we've ever seen before. So we try not to put too much weight into it. And I know for teams, it's been a little bit of a challenge as well with some of the restrictions and not having as many people able to attend. So I'm sure the teams kind of feel the same way, where I actually wouldn't be surprised if that's a trend that you see with some teams when we get to the actual draft, is you have opportunities to take your high level assets and kind of kick the can down the road a little bit until we get into a little bit more normal or status quo draft process. I wouldn't be surprised to see some teams take that approach and say, hey, look, like we're just not really comfortable with what we have on a lot of these guys this year. So unless we have a slam dunk fit, we're trying to trade back, trying to get more picks for 2022. You already saw the Detroit Lions, and they've already begun that process. The New York Jets with the same thing. So obviously the Jets will at least be making an early pick at 2. We'll see what the Lions choose to do. But yeah, it's hard to buy all the way in on the pro day numbers just because you don't know.
Yeah, you really don't. Talking to people around the league, do you get the sense that there is much more uncertainty, just not with the numbers, but the fact that scouts really weren't on campus this fall, Kyle, so maybe they don't necessarily have the same type of information for guys off the field, the type of guys they are, and things of that nature?
Yeah, so they're trying their best, right? You try and resource as best you can, and they have plenty of data points available to them, but it's not the data points that for so many you're accustomed to having anytime you have to make these decisions. So for some, it's like, this is an incomplete assessment. So team by team, I'm sure it's going to be different how they choose to handle that. But that's something that, has been kicked around at least a couple of times in some of the conversations that we've had with TDN and our scouting staff meetings between everybody who's either worked in the league or has connections to people that are in the league. It's kind of been just like an underlying common theme of like, we can't help but feel like this process is not the status quo that we're accustomed to.
All right, let's talk about the class here, Kyle, because, everyone has X number of first-round grades. Let's start there. How many first-round grades do you guys have in this class? Is it 15, 20? How many true first-round players are actually coming out this year?
So for my personal board, I have 24.
Oh, wow, that's a lot.
For our cross-check board, which is the collective effort of all of our full-time scouts on staff, we have 17. So I got a couple more guys that I like a little bit more. And that's a pretty common theme when you look at everybody's board, the way that it's stacked. You've got a core group of like 15 guys that everybody universally agrees is first rounds. And then you've got, between myself, Joe Marino, Dre Harris, Jordan Reed, everybody else has like a handful of guys that they individually really liked. And it almost gives you like that team dynamic where different teams will evaluate it a little differently. So that's why I like the collaborative effort that we have in place this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about those guys that everyone believes are first round picks, right? Let's take the quarterbacks out of the mix for a second here, Kyle. Who are the guys that you have as those true top tier, top 10 level, top 15 level first round picks that are non-quarterbacks that Giant fans should be sitting there and hoping get pushed down the board to them at 11?
Sure. So the consensus first round grades that TDN has given out this spring that are not quarterbacks: offensive tackle Penei Sewell, tight end Kyle Pitts, wide receiver Jalen Waddle from Alabama, wide receiver Jamar Chase from LSU, cornerback Caleb Farley. He's flagged with some medical stuff. He's had two back procedures in the past 2 years, so there's some potential for him to predictively fall in the draft, but we love his talent. Linebacker Micah Parsons, offensive tackle Christian Darrisaw, edge rusher Kwity Paye, offensive lineman Rashawn Slater, wide receiver Devontae Smith, and then I would throw Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State in there as well. We really like his tape.
Interesting. Okay, I want to dip into a couple of those guys because I think a couple of those names are interesting. In terms of the offensive linemen, Slater and Sewell, how would you rank those guys up? And I'll throw Jenkins into the mix too, with the offensive line group that came out last year.
I think last year's group had more talent that was ready to play at tackle right away. And I know that's a little ironic because I know that was something that Andrew Thomas, at least when he first started playing this past year, it was a little rough around the edges, and I felt like he settled in a little bit towards the second half of the season. But Penei Sewell, he was 19 when we last saw him play in 2019 as a true sophomore. He sat out 2020. The talent level is undeniable. The physical skills are off the charts, but he won a lot at Oregon just off of being a better athlete than the people across the line from him. So if you took him and you combine him with the technical side of Rashawn Slater, I think you get one really good, like, plug and play. He's ready to go. He'd be a stud at the top of the draft board. Now, Penei Sewell still are within our top three prospects because you're projecting for what he can become, not just what he is right now. But I think Slater's probably more technically ready to play in the NFL right now. But for some teams, he's probably going to be evaluated as an interior offensive lineman because he doesn't have great mass or great length. He's super smart. They say he could play all five positions. And the good news for him, if that is true, and indeed, like, he can snap, and I know he can play guard just based on watching him play on tape, everybody's going to have a spot for him on their line. Regardless, if you're a team that wants to run out a bunch of guys that are 315, 325 on your offensive line, that center spot for him, if he can snap there, he's going to still have appeal for those teams. For teams that are a little less strict with their thresholds, he'll be an offensive tackle. So he's the one for me that I point to and say he's ready to play no matter where he goes. It's just where he would play on that specific line.
The one thing I noticed too, I feel like the arm lengths are shorter this year. Last year, Wills, Wirfs, Thomas, and Becton all had 34-plus inch arms, right? I'm trying to remember, those top offensive linemen, not a lot of them, if any of them, had, more than 33.5-inch arms, Kyle, for that matter. How big of a deal do you think that's going to be as NFL's teams decide, well, this guy's a tackle, or maybe we're going to have to move him into guard? Because, like, Liam Eichenberg is a perfect example. You watch his tape at Notre Dame, he looks like a tackle. He plays like a tackle, but then, not even 33.5-inch arms. So he was 32.5, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So how do you think teams will look at arm length this year? Because these guys are not coming out with the same type of measurements we've seen for tackles in the past. So I think anything above 32.5, they'd still be okay with in a lot of cases. You're not going to get like that prototype box checked. But for me and what I've been able to ascertain from conversations that I've had, you can work with 32.5 plus. Okay. And in some cases for teams that are less strict on it, they just covet the feet and the base more, 32. You can get away with it. It's not ideal. So I think those teams are just going to have to ask those questions now. And I do think it's interesting. We're getting closer to the draft and everybody's starting to feel like they have a little bit more information. Whether or not it's information or disinformation that's out there intentionally is another debate for another day. But Penei Sewell seems to be a prospect who's if he doesn't go 5 to Cincinnati, where does he end up? Because from what I've heard, the Dolphins are in on pass rushers at 6 and Detroit at 7. Is that a trade out spot for a quarterback who falls? And then, Carolina at 8. And like everybody been talking about Penei Sewell potentially being like a top 3 selection for a really long time. And Rashawn Slater, he's kind of going to be one of those guys that's in this sweet spot with Dallas at 10 and the Giants at 11. And
I don't think you're going to see a real high demand, whereas we saw with the offensive tackles, all four of the top four guys were off the board in the first 11 picks, I think, or 14 picks, with Tampa Bay trading up with. I don't think you'll see that same demand and run on this year's class, despite the fact that you can't have enough good offensive linemen.
I'll get back to the offensive line in a second, but I got to ask you, you said Miami's in on pass rushers at 6, or do you mean pass catchers?
Pass catchers.
That's what I figured you meant. Okay. I'm like, wow, they moved up for a pass rusher. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why Tevin Jenkins over Elijah Vera Tucker?
So Tevin Jenkins being able to play right tackle, our group collectively felt he has the threshold to play. I believe he was another guy that was at 33.5 on the arm length. But his play at right tackle was phenomenal. Vera Tucker, we felt collectively, is probably better suited to play inside at guard, which is where he played in 2019 when Austin Jackson was still on the roster. But he showcased himself fairly well this past year at left tackle. So if you wanted to get the best combination of 5 guys out there, then Vera Tucker's going to be qualified because he can play inside or out. And if you have somebody who goes down, or you want to try him at tackle and let him fail his way inside to guard, you can do that. But we just felt a little more comfortable. And Vera Tucker just barely missed being a consensus first-round grade. So 3 of our 4 guys had first-round grades on Vera Tucker. So we like Vera Tucker a lot. He's currently sitting like 16th on our collective board. So he's right there in that conversation. But for me personally, I view him as a guy who I would love to see him inside at guard, because I thought a lot of his 2019 tape was really, really good where he played inside.
You mentioned Micah Parsons being in that top group, which doesn't surprise me. I guess my question for you on Parsons, because to me, he'll take on blockers in the run game. He's sideline to sideline. He blitzes well, really good in the box. Run game defense is fantastic. The one question I have for him is the one area that I think is probably most important for linebackers, Kyle, and that's coverage. He has the physical ability and athleticism to obviously move and cover that way, but I'm not sure we saw, and part of it was his role now, so I don't want to knock him for this if he wasn't really asked to do it all that much, is the pattern reading, the instincts, the zone, that sort of coverage stuff for a guy that's fairly new to the position. So how do you see him advancing in that area, which we both know is more and more important in the NFL with teams trying to attack that short middle of the field?
So I think his third down value early on in his transition to the league is going to have to come in pressure situations. And whether that's you're walking him up on the edge, or he's stacked and you want to go cross dog and bring him up the middle and attack up the A gaps with him, he's explosive enough to get home from the second level. So it's not like you have to have him like walked up in a mug alignment, which he's right there on the line of scrimmage across from the center. But that's kind of the looming question, is I don't really ever see him being super appealing in like man-to-man coverage. So it's more so, can you get him comfortable in zone drops? And there were some flashes of that, like the Memphis game in the bowl game that they had, his last game that he played. There was a little bit of that as far as zone drops and attacking a team that was trying to spread you out and put you into conflict. But that has the potential to be a sore spot in year one, specifically for Micah Parsons, especially having not played in 2020. But I do at least have the optimism of you can keep him on the field if you are a team that plays an aggressive style and likes to blitz and bring pressure, and you can move him around a little bit. You could stand him off the edge. You can lean him inside as a stacked guy. So that's one of those evaluations for us where you look at that and you have to ask yourself, okay, like what can he do? And are there landing spots in which he could be asked to do that? And you forecast that based on assuming any team that brings him in is not going to ask him to play Tampa 2 and do a bunch of zone drops or try and run out and hit hook curl from being lined up on the line of scrimmage on 3rd and 8 and expect to get good results in those situations.
So use him like the Bucs use Devin Smith is basically what you're telling me.
Right.
Right. You use Levante David to cover Travis Kelce and then have Devin Smith just attack the football, which is
correct.
Not
just come downhill and be a wrecking ball.
That makes sense. All right. Let's go to pass rusher here. You had one pass rusher in your consensus top 15, right?
Yes. Kwity Paye.
All right. Why is Paye your number one pass rusher? Because I think this is a group where you're probably going to have the most differences between analysts in terms of who the number one guy is in this group.
So I was the Big Ten guy for TDN throughout the summer and the fall. So I had a chance to kind of watch him from start to finish. And Michigan didn't play a lot of football, so he didn't get a lot of chances to change the narrative on him. But you look at, and I was actually just talking with Joe Marino about this morning. You look at transitions for players at the pass rush position who come in, and the ones that have success versus the ones that so often are like the flavor of the year. And I know Azeez Ojulari is a really popular player from the University of Georgia. But Kwity Paye at 275 pounds, he's really good in run defense already. So you know he's going to be on the field on early downs. He has yet to really fully flesh out his pass rush acumen. But so many times you see the defensive ends and pass rushers who are able to reduce angles are the ones that transition better in the NFL as compared to those who play at steep angles and rely on speed and agility to win around the outside. So Paye, with his heavy hands, his length, his explosiveness, his ability to take an offensive tackle where he doesn't want to go while he's engaged with him is going to open up the door for him to then run through more shallow angles and get to the quarterbacks. Whereas you look at the guys who are much more reliant on whether that is Azeez Ojulari, or you get a little bit deeper down into the class and you look at guys like Quincy Roche, guys who win with speed. They have to force you to miss off the outside, and then they have to turn a really steep angle to get there. And, you know, reducing angles is going to allow you to compensate for the quarterback changing his launch point more. So, plus he's on Bruce Feldman's freak list. We saw the reported 3-cone drill, and the 3-cone that he ran was, I still think, 0.2 of a second slower than what it was reported, but nevertheless, it is otherworldly for a guy that's 275 pounds. So Paye's athletic profile projects favorably in my eyes as a guy who will have success because he wins with power and you can work with the rest and go from there.
If Jalen Phillips did not have the injury red flags, would he be in that same group with Paye?
So I've been having this conversation from the light of TDN's consensus rankings. If you looked at my individual rankings, Jalen Phillips is my highest graded defensive player in this year's draft.
I don't blame you because, Kyle, if you look at the film this year, he was the best pass rusher in the country. He was.
Yeah. So obviously he had multiple concussions at UCLA. He had a wrist procedure in which he had a couple of bones taken out of his wrist after a moped incident. He had to medically retire from UCLA and then came back at Miami. And so you just have to be comfortable with what that situation was. You got to clear him on the wrist medical because he had a pretty significant procedure done there. And then you need to be comfortable with the concussions and the fact that he medically retired and already walked away from the game before he came back. If you're comfortable with that, Jalen Phillips his pass rush palette is phenomenal. He's super flexible at 260 pounds. He can play in any front, any defense, and he will win one-on-ones and rush the passer and have great success doing it. So it's just a matter of whatever that situation was in which he left UCLA, you as a team, if you're going to invest in this guy, and he's probably going to end up being a top 20, top 25 selection, you just have to be comfortable knowing that he went off the beaten path a little bit to get to where he is.
We haven't mentioned Gregory Rousseau yet, who was a teammate of Phillips and Roche. And he had 15 and a half sacks. He's the one guy in this group that has elite production, but that was 2 years ago. He got a lot of that pass rush production rushing from the inside, even at nose tackle in that Miami defense that year. I feel like NFL people that have league experience are a lot higher on Rousseau than people like us who are kind of doing this from the outside looking in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? And do you agree with that first off? And where do you think the room for Rousseau is to become great? And where are the danger spots for him to not be great?
So just based off the film, he did sneak in for me personally, and he was one of the 24 that I had assigned a first-round grade to. So he's at the very bottom of that bucket for me. So I'm in on Gregory Rousseau. I would have loved to have seen him show up at the Miami Pro Day at like 280 and have put on a little bit of weight to see how he would have tested. Instead, I believe he was 266 pounds, which is kind of exactly where he was. And I suppose you want to leave the window open for if a team wants you to play on the outside or wants to bulk you up a little bit. But I think his pathway for success, because he's so long, He is quite explosive in linear situations in which he's playing forward. And that's why you saw Miami so often put him down into the A gap and the B gap in pass rush situations, just like run straight through those blocks, and you're so much quicker than those guys down inside. I think that area for that pathway for success for him is to add some weight to his frame and be a guy who can almost like, I don't want to say JJ Watt's name because that invokes the wrong ceiling for his play. But you think about JJ Watt and Jadeveon Clowney, both of those guys in the Houston defense for the last couple of years that they were there, you can line them up at base end. You can play them down inside, and they can play the run really effectively in the B gap if you need them to. So I don't want a team to draft Gregory Rousseau and expect him to play outside alignment and play wide and expect him to claim a bunch of wins off the edge as a pass rusher. Like, you got to shorten those angles and you got to get him into a position which he's better suited to play through the contact, because that's where he won so much at Miami.
No, I'm with you. And I think if you're looking for a place for him to succeed, I think that's it. I'm with you on that. How about a guy like Owe, who has all the measurables, but none of the numbers, at least this past year? He had five sacks, I think, back in 2019 if memory is correct. How do you guys project him? How much does that lack of production worry you guys? Are you more concerned with pressures and how he gets to the quarterback and his athletic ability?
So we do put more weight in wins as a pass rusher, regardless of whether or not you're getting home to the quarterback or not, because there are, things the quarterback can do, whether it's throwing it away or escaping your pathway that prevents sacks from happening on what would otherwise be good rushes. But for Owe, I was encouraged by the fact that I thought he played the run better this past year than what he did in 2019. He showed the ability to kind of win the point of attack, win the line of scrimmage with more consistency. But as a pass rusher, it's just a matter of, we got to develop a plan. We got to get you to a point in which you anticipate what an offensive tackle is going to try to do to you and understand how to deconstruct that in real time. And we're just not quite there yet. So I think about Jason Owe and teams like the Baltimore Ravens, who lost both of their starting edge guys in Yannick Ngakoue and then also Matt Judon in free agency this year. They blitz approximately 50% of their defensive snaps. So teams that can blitz and generate free rushers with overloads and can kind of get him into a spot where, at least early on in his career, you can manufacture some free runs off the edge for him. I think those are the more friendly landing spots for a guy like Jason Owe, because I think he's physically capable of becoming anything and being a really good player. But if you're going to play him early on, if you're going to draft him in the first round and you're going to play him early on, you are really hoping you can onboard him really quickly with building out his pass rush counters, or else you run the risk of running him out there and he kind of just becomes a guy who occupies a blocker. And nobody's drafting a pass rusher in the first round to do that.
All right, let's jump to the second round here, Kyle, very quickly up front. Give me some offensive linemen that you think can swing guard tackle that could be available for the Giants with their pick in the early 40s. And same deal for pass rushers. What are guys that you think might drop to that second round, whether it's a Peyton Turner or whomever else you guys have in that area where the Giants could find some value up front on either side of the ball with their second round pick?
So Jalen Mayfield from Michigan is one that really jumps out to me. I really liked his tape. We talked about all the inflation in the pro days. He bombed his pro day. So, that didn't really help the case for him staying outside at tackle. But I think he's a better functional athlete than what he showed with his pro day numbers. So you're talking about guys who have positional flexibility. I think Jalen Mayfield from Michigan, guard tackle potential. Alex Leatherwood, he's played at right guard and left tackle for Alabama. So, and he kind of fits that physical brand that I associate with the Giants and Dave Gettleman being there. So he's a guy I also really like. He's played on both sides of the line. He played on the left side at left tackle. And he played at right guard when he was a starter at Alabama. And I would also mention Jackson Carman from Clemson as a guy who played left tackle for them. But I think he does project a little bit more favorably at 6'5", 345 pounds to kick inside and play some guards. But you at least know he's got the playing experience to do so at tackle. So I like those guys as potential versatile utility offensive lineman. If you're just looking for your best combination of five, maybe he plays at guard, maybe he plays at tackle, depending on how you want to play the musical chairs with things. As far as pass rushers, thinking about the physical style of play that I associate with Dave Gettleman, and Carlos Basham Jr. for Wake Forest is one that
a good pick.
Really jumps off at you. My comp for him is Shaq Lawson, who was a first-round pick for the Buffalo Bills not that long ago. He's got traded this past offseason to the Houston Texans. Janarius Robinson from Florida State is kind of like my guy on day two. If I wanted to stake my flag in the ground and bet on a guy's traits, 6'5", 266 pounds. He was really good at the Senior Bowl. He's got phenomenal length. Like, he's a prototype build defensive end. But Florida State, for whatever reason, has done a very poor job over the last couple of seasons of developing their talent. The light bulb came on for him a little bit this year as far as winning the line of scrimmage with more effectiveness. And you see a ton of flashes, whether it's rushing the passer or playing the run with Janarius Robinson. Physically talented to the umpteenth degree. It's just a question of, can you get him out of that environment that did not cater to him developing himself as a player? But I was highly encouraged by what I saw at the Senior Bowl. So Janarius Robinson is a guy you're looking maybe early day or early round 3 there in the back half of day 2 of the draft. The traits are there. They're undeniable. Somebody will bet on them. I would be somebody, if it were me as a decision maker, I would be doing that same thing.
Yeah, I was impressed by him at the Senior Bowl, too, in the reps he got in those pass rush drills. I thought he looked good. All right, let's have some fun at the top of the draft here, Kyle. Your thoughts right now, how many quarterbacks go in the top 10 ahead of the Giants?
I'll say 4. I think we'll get quarterbacks in the first 3, and I think you'll have an opportunity, whether it's the Atlanta Falcons themselves or somebody trading out or trading into that spot. But I think that's probably where you'll see that 4th quarterback go. If not, then I wouldn't sleep on Denver at 9. But I think the Carolina getting out of the quarterback market has really kind of sapped the urgency of potential trade situations as things currently stand. They obviously invested to a fair degree in Sam Darnold, but they were the team that everybody assumed was going to be the super aggressive team. They were rumored to be super in on Deshaun Watson. They had kicked the tires on Matt Stafford. So you knew they were going to make a move. So everybody was kind of sitting there holding their breath saying, okay, like, would they trade with Atlanta within the division to go up and get a quarterback? But it felt like San Francisco kind of beat them to the punch to get up to 3, and then they made the move for Sam Darnold. So I think they'll hold status quo for the time being, unless Atlanta gets a great deal.
If there is a team that you think would move up, and I think it's tough, right? I think maybe Denver moves up to 4 if there's a quarterback they really like with Atlanta. I think that's possible. Is it too far of a move, though, for a team like New England or a team like Washington or a team like Chicago to get all the way up to like 7 with Detroit, even 10 with Dallas, maybe, if they want to get that last quarterback that's left without a seat when the music stops?
So I don't think it's too far to fall as long as you're comfortable with what the price is going to be. And that won't be cheap to jump that far. I think depending on who the quarterback is, you could see certain teams having interest in making splashes, but only on the condition that it's the right quarterback. I know of at least one team that's kind of in that first half of the first round who's somewhat associated with needing a quarterback, but if Trey Lance were there on the table for them, they would make an aggressive move to make sure that they landed him. Justin Fields for me is my second rated quarterback in this class. I think if any of these teams that are fringe playoff teams, whether it's New England or you mentioned Chicago and Washington, or you even go further back with like the Pittsburgh Steelers at 24, if Justin Fields is sitting there in that same range and like you can get a deal done, and Pittsburgh not that long ago traded up from 20 to 10 with Denver to draft Devin Bush.
That's right.
So we obviously trading up for a quarterback is a little bit of a different animal, but we've seen that get into the top 10 before, picks from that range in the not too recent history. So if that guy's out there for you and you're a playoff team and you have a complete roster, then yeah, I think you should be having that conversation and probably be willing to pay a price to go up and get him.
So this is a combo question, I guess. Do you buy the Shanahan Mac Jones connection at 3? And if you had to guess, which of those 5 quarterbacks is the one that's going to be left without a chair when the music stops and could maybe fall into that, 10 to 15 area ish in that first round?
So I think that player will be Mac Jones. So I'm not buying the San Francisco thing. It's too loud, too fast.
I agree with you.
And
I'm with you.
I just have a hard time seeing the San Francisco 49ers giving up 2 future first-round picks to go give up a guy who, for as proficient as he was running the Alabama offense, they have a system there at Alabama, and they have been supremely ahead of everybody else with what they've done from a system perspective when their offensive coordinator, who's now name escaping me for some reason, the head coach at Texas.
Sarkisian.
Steve Sarkisian. Thank you. Sarkisian coached circles around everybody. And Mac Jones absorbed that playbook. He executed phenomenally. But the traits and projecting him to the next level and having those X factor, it factor dynamics, if you want to bet on him being the next Tom Brady as far as between the ears, more power to you. But that's not a gamble that I'm willing to take.
So you think Jones will be the guy that drops? Interesting. How many and which of those top playmakers, and of course, we know the guys we're talking about, Pitts, Waddle, Chase, Smith, do you think are most likely to be gone before the Giants pick at 11?
I think Pitts will be gone. I think Chase will be gone. And I think you'll have a chance of seeing one of the Alabama receivers there, whether it's Waddle or Smith. I think that depends on how things lay out. Obviously, I cover the Dolphins, so I think I have a fairly good feel on what their pecking order is. And if things played out in front of them a certain way, I think Devontae Smith would come off the board before the Giants pick as well. And then it's just kind of a question of Detroit. If it plays out in that scenario, say you saw Pitts go 4 to Atlanta, and then you saw Chase go 5, and then the Dolphins take Devontae Smith at 6. Detroit, team that really needs a wide receiver, do they just take the last one? Do they trade at there's a scenario in which you could get none of them. I think that's an very unlikely scenario. But I would say you're going to have a good chance of seeing one of the Alabama receivers left on the board. It's just a question of how things fall in front of you.
Do you buy the Bengals going playmaker, or are you thinking offensive line for them?
My gut still tells me it's offensive line. I know that there was a big to-do about Joe Burrow and the Jamar Chase connection and him kind of voicing his support, if you will, without kind of grandstanding for Jamar Chase. But my gut just tells me that will be an offensive line spot because Riley Reif is not somebody that they should be, if the Bengals are wise, should be assuming is going to take care of your offensive line problems.
How close do you guys, I'm assuming you have, or Pitts and Chase, I'm assuming are your top 2 playmakers, right, on your overall board?
We have Waddle as our top rated wide receiver.
Ooh, tell me why.
So you watch the tape and his ability to win against man coverage is phenomenal. And he just, in a lot of cases, wasn't the first progression in the read. And a lot of times the first progression was open in Alabama. So he ended up not getting the football anyway. But Waddle also has an undeniable impact on zone. When I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah had referenced, he was the fastest wide receiver in this draft class from GPS speed tracking. And it wasn't even close. So his ability to force you to play a lot of soft coverage in zone over top of him is going to create a lot of space underneath. His average touchdown reception for 17 career touchdown receptions was 44.5 yards. So he's just big play in a bottle. He wins vertically. He was 21 of 26 for his career on targets beyond 20 yards downfield. So just unbelievable efficiency as a receiver and big plays. But you watch him play, and he's not just a vertical guy who runs down the field. And I think that was the biggest shame about Waddle getting hurt after the first 4 games of the season and that opening kickoff against Tennessee was he was outproducing Devontae Smith.
Sure.
As far as a yardage production, he had more yards than Devontae Smith through the first 4 games of the season. And all Alabama did was take all those reps and they said, okay, Devontae, we're going to put you in that role too. And it just completely showcased him. As long as the medical questions with his ankle checks out. For our money at the wide receiver position, he defeats press coverage early on. He runs the deep route as good as anybody. He can win in short spaces. You can manufacture him in RPOs and short game and screen game and quick game and get the ball in his hands. And he's just as much of a dynamic threat to take it the distances as anybody else. So obviously that's off the beaten path a little bit, but when you watched him play on tape, it was like he won almost all the routes that he was running, even if he wasn't getting targeted the ball.
So based on who you think is going to be gone then, based on who you're talking to around the league and all that stuff, Kyle, and who might be available when the Giants select at 11, who do you think are the guys, Giant fans, that should be kind of locked in on, that you think there's a good chance will be there, and you also think are a good fit and will meet the value at that pick at 11?
I think Waddle is a name that you can start this conversation with. And, he's, because he had the medical issue and, he's not a big receiver. I think he's somebody who may endure a little bit of a slide outside the top 10. And obviously you did not see a great demand in pass catchers in last year's draft. I think Henry Ruggs went 11th and he was the first one off the board. So that is a name that should be at the forefront of Giants fans' minds. I think Devontae Smith is also a worthwhile conversation to have if you're the Giants. I know we mentioned Kwity Paye already, Jalen Phillips. I think they've done a really nice job kind of addressing some of their needs with signings. Obviously, they spent big money on Adoree Jackson and Kenny Galladay, and they brought John Ross in. So they've kind of alleviated the pressure where they can just kind of stay true to, okay, let's evaluate the high value positions because you're picking 11. You should be expecting a premier position. Don't force yourself into drafting for need. And so those top names at those positions really jump out at me. And if Rashawn Slater's there and you want to have that conversation of, okay, do we want to take him and just rely on his versatility to play him, whether we're going to play him on one of the interior spots and move somebody around? A lot of the names that we've talked about already, Paye, potentially Phillips if they're comfortable with him, potentially Ozolari if they're looking for a little bit more explosiveness and speed off the edge, Waddle, Smith, Rashawn Slater. I don't think Penei Sewell is going to make it to you guys. Those would be the names that I'd be really dialed in on if I were a Giants fan.
All right, a couple of random later in the draft questions that I've been debating in my own head. I want to get your take on them. Tight end 2 in this draft class. Once you get past Pitts, I watched Tommy Tremble yesterday, and I have a hard time figuring out why he's not in that conversation, to be honest with you. He kind of reminds me of Kyle Juszczyk, to be honest with you, except he can play tight end. He does a little bit of everything. How do you look at that tight end class once you get past Pitts with the Pat Freiermuths, the Trembles, the Brevin Jordans, and kind of that group of guys?
So Freiermuth, obviously the appeal for him over Tremble, the argument is we've seen more of him. He's been more productive throughout the course of his career at Penn State. I like Pat. I think Pat, for me, is my second-rated tight end. I don't have a first-round grade on him or anything like that. He's a solid day 2 option. The baby Gronk moniker that he took on for a little bit has since been passed off to the guy who was playing in front of Tommy Tremble, which was Michael Mayer, the freshman tight end there, number 87, who was phenomenal as a freshman for Notre Dame. But Tremble is a guy who, if you want a tight end that you can move around, not necessarily dissimilar to what you're capable of doing with Evan Ingram, Tremble would be a great fit for you. I think Freiermuth is more of a pure inline, even if he's off the ball, but a guy who's going to play inside the tackle box area. Whereas Tremble, and it's ironic because he was so often just asked to be a blocker. A lot of his production was kind of leak out into the flat and get some run after catch for Tommy Tremble. Tremble's got the highest ceiling of the guys beyond Kyle Pitts in my mind. So he's my 3rd-rated tight end. I do have Freiermuth ahead of him just because that's a little bit cleaner projection for like a traditional tight end. But I think you're on the right track with Tommy Tremble, where his ceiling is the highest of anybody not named Kyle Pitts in the tight end class.
Who do you like out of the second group of corners? Get past, Surtain and J.C. Horn, and, who knows where Farley's going to drop now. Do you have Newsome in the first round and the second? If the Giants want to go corner in that second round, who are some of the guys that you would think they might want to try and target? Or even day 3, if you like a guy that might drop into round 3.
Yeah, so Greg Newsome is inside my top 32 prospects. Don't have a first round grade on him specifically as far as evaluation, but I like Newsome a good deal. He's very loose and fluid. The big question for him is he's never played a full season. The injuries have been problematic there, but in coverage, he can play man zone, he can play off, he can play press. So you like the versatility that you get there, and he's got some good ball skills too. I like Eric Stokes from Georgia, who obviously made much to do about the 40 time that he ran down at the House of Athlete Combine this year. And I was actually in person for that one. So I don't care what the time was. I know it was fast as hell and he can blaze a little bit. So I think he's physical. He's another guy that's like 6'1". So he's long. He's got that scrap to him as well. So I like Eric Stokes as a potential round 2 corner. And then Asante Samuel Jr., if you're not afraid of size, if you're comfortable with a guy who's 5'10 and a half, 5'11, Asante Samuel Jr. has plenty of that quick feet that allow you to close distances quickly and when you're playing soft coverage and attack the football. And for some teams, he's probably going to be warranted only as a nickel corner, but I think in the right system, he can play outside. And I like his potential quite a bit. And he showed some growth as far as ball skills this past year for Florida State.
What's the position group that we're going to wake up on Friday morning before round 2 and 3, where we're going to say, holy cow, we are still stacked at this spot. You can get a plug and play starter at this position on day 2 if you get one early enough?
I think it's the interior offensive line. I really like the interior offensive line class. I think Elijah Vera Tucker's destined for a date in round 1, but Landon Dickerson's got the medical questions. Obviously, he tore his knee up in the SEC championship game. That didn't stop him from doing cartwheels in the background of Mac Jones's pro day just last week. So he looks to be healthy, but from a medical perspective, that is a question with him. Creed Humphrey, Wyatt Davis from Ohio State. There's some really good interior offensive linemen in this year's class. And some of these guys are guys that I had already mentioned as far as being potential tackle guard, flexible guys like Alex Leatherwood. And I'd even put Brady Christensen from BYU in that bucket as a guy who I don't think he has an ideal size profile to play outside. I think he's like 305 and he has short arms. I think he's got like 32 and 1/8 inch arms. So, but if you're going to run a zone style system, so maybe not necessarily a fit for the Giants, but you can get a lot of good offensive linemen. And that's what makes the debate for the teams that are in offensive line consideration so interesting is you typically associate, okay, you can get a wide receiver on day 2 and that guy will come in and he'll be a starter for you right away. But if you need offensive help in general, teams like Cincinnati and Miami, it's like, well, you can also get the lineman on day 2 this year. Do you want to go get an elite pass catcher instead? So it's kind of turned that argument in against itself. So that's a fun dynamic of this year's class.
Yeah, the argument we've been having, to be honest with you, Kyle, if you're sitting there and you're staring at, one of either Slater or Sewell and then one of either Waddle or Smith at 11, right, where do you go? Because both position groups are pretty deep where you can get one in the second round at either spot.
Yeah, so that's an unenviable spot, and potentially some of those decisions will be made for the Giants because you're picking 11. The team I don't envy is Cincinnati, and Cincinnati picking at 5, and you got Chase is going on the board, easy. Pitts is on the board, Sewell's on the board. Like, good luck making a choice, and let's hope the board breaks for you guys the second time around. But yeah, I think that's at least the I don't want to say luxury, but the upside of the Giants situation is hopefully some of those hard decisions are made for you. And you could say, look, we loved X number of guys. This is the guy that's left. We're going this route. We'll feel good about tier 2 on day 2 tomorrow.
All right, next to last question, then I'll get your prediction here. I'm waking up on Saturday morning on day 3 of the draft. Where do you think there's going to be a spot where you're going to be like, oh, all right, I can maybe still get some round 2 value here at the very top end of round 4 because this group just happens to be so deep?
I think the edge group, for the lack of appeal it has at the top of the class, I think you get down into like 75 and down in the pecking order. And I think there's some really good names in that area. So if I'm just looking at the consensus rankings for TDN, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys in the top 50, and then another 7 guys from 50 to 100.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
and those guys are more scheme specific. They're guys like Janarius Robinson, who hadn't put it all together at Florida State. They're guys like Peyton Turner from Houston, who played at 290 and then cut to 270 this past year and played there. So you only have like a 1 year sample size of what his body type looks like. You've got scheme specific guys like Hamilcar Rashed and Jordan Smith from UAB, who used to be a recruit to the University of Florida. So you have a lot of different types, and depending on what you're looking for, if you want an early down guy, you want a designated pass rusher that's not going to play on all 3 downs, you want a developmental guy. I think the edge group, there's going to be a lot of value to be had. It's just a question of what specifically are you looking for versus the rest of the league.
All right, the Draft Network, and you're the head honcho over there, Kyle. You guys are the kings of the mock draft simulator, so I'm going to make this very tough on you. I want round 1, 2, and 3 predictions for you for the New York Giants in the 2021 draft. What you got?
Okay. Let's go with Devontae Smith, wide receiver, in the first round. If we're looking at offensive line, I wish I could say Vera Tucker would be there for you in the second round.
I think that's unlikely. I'm with you.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, but we could dream about it. I'll probably go with an edge rusher. Maybe Gregory Rousseau in the early 2. I think he's got a realistic chance to get there. I won't completely disqualify that as a potential. And then you need third round as well?
Sure, why not?
I'm going to make you happy. I'm going to give you Tommy Tremble there.
That does make me happy. Kyle, man, awesome stuff. Tell the folks where they can find everything you do and everything about the Draft Network.
Sure. So if you're interested in following me on social media, I'm at Grinding the Tape. The Draft Network is at The Draft Network, thedraftnetwork.com. Player rankings, big boards, mock drafts, team-specific content, college football content. We've got 3 daily podcasts as well. So you get like 10 to 15 podcasts a week that come out courtesy of TDN. You can find all that on the website. It's a great tool this time of year, but we treat this process as a year-round process, just like the teams do. So it's a great way to kind of stay plugged in on college football, the team needs of everybody in your division and your conference and you specifically. And it's just really been cool to see as it's grown, how many different ways that we can attack football coverage. So check out thedraftnetwork.com, and yours truly, I'm on social media. I'm at Grinding the Tape.
Kyle, good stuff, my friend. We'll talk soon. Enjoy the next 3 weeks.
Thank you. You too, John.
That's Kyle Krabs. We thank him for joining us on this episode of the Giants Huddle podcast. As a reminder, you can find this podcast and all of our podcast offerings, including our daily show, every weekday at noon, Big Blue Kickoff Live on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank, which you can find on the Giants mobile app at giants.com/podcast and on your favorite podcast platforms. For Kyle, I'm Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on the Giants Huddle.